Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. And I have someone that's a unique individual. I love having unique people on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And this guy is unique. He is Dr. Joe Perez, Dr. Joseph Perez, and he goes by Dr. Joe. Now, I wish I could go by something cool like Dr. B, or maybe like I don't know if I should call him Dr. J. I think that would be a little sacrilegious to one Julius Erving, the Hall of Fame basketball player. But he is an international keynote speaker, and he brings data to life and life to data. And we're going to get into that and so much more and tell you his story. But it is my honor to welcome Dr. Joe Perez to the Intentional Encourager podcast. Joe, how are you today?
I'm doing all right, Brian. Thank you so much, sir. You're very kind to give such a kind and gracious introduction. And while I'm not going to take Dr. J, that's for sure. I mean, I can dunk, but that's only on like a 5-foot basket when I'm standing on a bucket or something. But
I started to grab some Kroger brand Oreo cookies today, so I didn't do that because I'm trying to take off a few pounds, but I can dunk some Oreos if I had to.
There you go, right? That's my kind of dunking. That's right.
Yeah.
Or Dunkin' Donuts or something.
There you go. I like where your head's at, Joe.
Yeah, there you go.
I like where your head's at. Joe, in the midst of COVID-19, let's start here because you have had to radically alter what you do. You have given keynote addresses all over the world in regards to data and data security and things like that. But you have had to really take a different direction, a course correction, if you will, as far as how you present material and how you go about speaking to different conferences and organizations. Tell me a little bit about how things have changed for you in the last several months as we record this in the midst of COVID-19.
Sure, absolutely, Brian. Again, thank you so much for having me on your show, and that's a great question. It has been a wild ride, let me tell you. I started off the year traveling to Fort
You don't
Lauderdale.
say it's been a wild ride, huh?
It has, yes. Indeed. But the year started off January. I spoke, I had the opening keynote for the Applied Data Visualization Conference, healthcare conference in Fort Lauderdale. Followed by another, it was not a keynote, but that one I had a breakout session at Convey UX in Seattle and was all set the following month. That was in March. After speaking at Concentric in February, I was all set in March to go to Atlanta and then DC and then Savannah, Georgia, Venice, Italy, then back to Chicago and then to New York City. But COVID-19 just has a way of changing pretty much anything and everything that you can imagine. It was no longer safe, of course, to have in-person meetings. So one by one, they started either postponing. Some of them felt, well, let's postpone until later, like, I don't know, maybe November or something. And maybe by then we can have our in-person meeting. Others said, well, let's push it into 2021 just to be safe.
Yeah.
And still others said, the majority of them said, well, let's still have the conference when we were planning on having it. But instead of having it as a live in-person event, let's do some kind of digital format, some kind of a virtual platform, if you will, be it Zoom or some other platform, whatever the platform was, whether it was a proprietary thing or not. And thankfully, the majority of them wanted to go along with it. Now, for me, I much rather be at a conference where it's an in-person event, where I can look into the eyes of my audience and I can relate with them. You know, I can gauge what I'm going to say based on their body language. What I know a particular joke might play better to a group full of teachers, you know, to a room full of teachers than it would a bunch of data scientists or something. You know, you're not going to speak the same way to
You
one
can't
person.
humor a bunch of data scientists, man.
Well, it is possible. It is possible.
You're
Rather
kidding
difficult.
me.
Yeah, no,
Wow,
it is
yeah.
possible. I've done it. Yeah, in Chicago at the MDM Data Governance Summit last July, July of 2019.
Now, wait a minute. I got to ask you this.
Yes, sir.
How does a data science joke go? Does it say, you know, do you say a data scientist and an IT technician were sitting in a room together? I mean, is that how it goes?
Or you might say, you know, what happened to the data scientist's potted plant? And you say, I don't know, what happened to the data scientist's potted plant? And he goes, it grew square roots. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it might be something like that, you know. Yeah, right. You know, they walk into a restaurant, and he looks at him. He says, "Why the long face?" You know, or whatever. Now, I don't know how exactly that would work, but they can be humored. They can be humored. You know, when you start talking about things that are relevant, and that's just it. Is in an in-person event, it's easier to read the body language, you know, of your crowd. You know, I mean, even when they're on a Zoom thing, you know, when they're little bitty postage stamp size squares, you know, Hollywood squares or Brady Bunch around the corners. You can see them, and you at least see their faces and gauge how you're going to react and how you're going to gauge what you're going to say. But I like to be interactive with the audience, asking them questions. My goal when I stand before folks, like I talk about cultivating a climate for paradigm shift. I talk about the three-pronged approach. There are keywords that start with R, dealing with change. You recognize certain things about change, you resolve certain actions that you're going to take, and then you respond in a certain way. So those three words, I might ask them, okay, what was the first one? What was you can't really do that as easily in a virtual event as you can in an in-person event. So part of the pivoting was figuring out how I can try to engage the audience in a different way. And part of that came with designing games that I used at the very end, using a couple of different online platforms. It was pretty neat. You know, the questions that I would ask, they'd be like multiple choice type questions. They'd flash up on the screen, you know, and they would answer, and based on how quickly they answer, there would be certain point values that would be assigned to them for answering more quickly. They'd be rewarded. You'd see like a leaderboard as we progress through probably about 10 questions or so. It'd take about 10-15 minutes to go through it. And I've gotten a lot of really good positive responses from that, and people really loved it.
So how do you, so let me take it and bring it to where you are with keynote speaking and things like that. How do you, or how have you applied the 3 R's that you talk about to your own business and to your own way of delivering content? Because it's easy, Joe, to talk to someone else and say, well, here's the 3 R's of change. And I had a post just today on LinkedIn. You can go back and see that when you hear the podcast recording. And I talked about talked about care, being consistent, authentic, relatable, and engaging.
Right.
And so, I've had to do those things in my own life through this pandemic. So how have you incorporated those 3 R's of change that you speak to into how you do things today?
Sure, absolutely. So the first R being recognize. I had to recognize the way things were pivoting from an in-person audience to a virtual audience, recognizing that, as I tell the folks, change is inevitable, inexorable, and inspiring. So in doing so, I would seek out other speakers to see, hey, how did you handle this? How did you pivot your strategy as well? And I would bounce off ideas as I would connect with people on LinkedIn, or people would connect with me. We
And
bounce
those
ideas off of each other
conversations
to
are
see,
so important. Yeah, and I mean to interrupt you
absolutely.
there,
No,
but
that's all right.
those conversations are really important because a lot of times you can almost feel like, Joe, you're on an island.
Yeah,
You're kind of in your own little bubble. You're in your own little world. How am I going to deal with this? When you stop and think and you recognize, to what you just said, that there are other people that keynote speak for a living and do these things that have their own,
right.
that are in the same, they're in the very same situation you are, because the conference world basically shrank down to almost nothing,
That's
or it
exactly right.
became a virtual based way to connect and things like
Sure.
that through all the different platforms. I love what you said there, because so many times people in business, or so many people in maybe in clergy, or different walks of life, don't recognize that they are not alone in
Right.
walking through these different areas.
Exactly. And it was, seeking out others, and also being willing to help others and talk with them, and, share the things that I had learned.
Yeah,
And,
that's a great point too. That
right. And the cool thing about it, it resulted in much larger audiences for each of these events that was held in a virtual format.
mhm.
In addition to that, it led to quite a number of more invitations. I mean, by the time I get to the end of 2020, I will have spoken at 27 different conferences,
Man,
and I
that's
was only
incredible,
scheduled to
Joe.
speak at 12. I go from 12 to 27. It's just unbelievable.
Well, it's the connection that people
Right,
feel as though, and again, it is easy to be reactive.
right.
Another R, reactive.
Yeah. Instead of
When
proactive.
Well, yeah, it's easy to be reactive and say, well, I don't know how this is going to come together. And then somebody goes, okay, Joe, I think you would be great to speak over here. You may not have the contact, but I do. And because you were so gracious to help me, I'm going to proactively refer you to somebody else. And I think that's the great thing, Joe, that
Yes,
COVID has done, is it's
absolutely.
brought more people together from parts of the from all. I had a call the other day. I had a call on Tuesday with a lady in Australia. Here I am sitting in West Virginia. I'm like, this is as far away from Australia as you can get. But Zoom and these virtual platforms just bring people together. And I love what you said about the collaboration. Before we get into a couple of the other R's, talk about the importance of collaboration, because I know there's somebody listening that says, I have a competitor down the street that I have put up walls with because we're competitors.
Yep.
But now they may be facing the same things, and it may be a great opportunity for people who have been diametrically opposed for whatever reason or another now to come together and collaborate.
Absolutely. Forget these people building walls against each other. Let's start building some bridges. Okay, that's what I
Yeah.
want to do. I want to build a bridge, because see, I was an educator for 10 years before I got into my IT career, and I'm still an educator. Always have been, always will be a
Yeah.
teacher at heart. And part of the art of communication is collaboration, and part of that is building a bridge where you try to take someone from known to unknown. In my case, I've got the known. I've got the information that they want. I'm in a state of known. They're in a state of unknown. How do I get them from where they're at to where I want them to be,
Yeah.
unless I do build a bridge, find common ground, and give them something that relates, something that resonates with them? They are either going to um, they're either going to adopt what I'm telling them, or they're going to adapt what I'm telling them so they can work with it. And
Yeah.
if they either learn to adopt or adapt, they're going to end up being adept. is typically what I
That's
tell them,
great.
and I
That
found
is
that
so
to be
good.
true. Yeah,
That is so good. Because again, adoption is easy,
right.
adapting is not,
Nope.
but then becoming adept at something is a skill that is born from the marriage of adopting and
Yes,
adapting.
that's
And
precisely the point I'm getting at.
yeah,
That's
and I
exactly
love
what I
that.
shared.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
yeah.
love that.
Glad you picked up on that. That's good. That's excellent.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the blind squirrel theory in full effect, Joe. The blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
That's
But
right.
but talk about the two other R's, and I didn't mean to take us off
No, that's
into
okay.
a side tangent, but I loved where that piece of the conversation went because
Yeah,
we uncovered something else. So the second R that you talk about is
sure. The second R is resolve. I talk about resolving to balance both deference and determination. Those are opposite things. They are diametrically opposed to each other, but
yeah,
they have to be brought into balance. And as I start venturing out into some of these virtual platforms, I had to resolve to not turn back. Okay, I make a commitment. I'm going to stick with it. I have to
yeah,
resolve that, whether it's a live audience or it's a virtual audience. I'm going to give them the same level of dedication, the same level of passion that I would if I were right in front of them. A speaker that doesn't give his or her audience the time that they deserve does not deserve himself or herself to be behind that microphone.
well, and I learned this. You mentioned being an educator.
Hmm.
I learned this as a Sunday school teacher. When I was teaching Sunday school, and I was teaching 11 and 12-year-old kids,
I love that age.
preteens. Those I could teach teenagers. I could teach. Those were the hardest kids that I had to teach because you always had to bring them something that kept their attention.
Right.
And I had a lady that worked with me, and she was fabulous. And she would, I would say, I've got this idea. You're probably going to think it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard. And we would pull it off, and the kids would go. I had kids when I gave up teaching that age, when we were at a church. I had kids and their parents come up to me and say, or their parents would say, my kids, would you reconsider? Because my kids still talk about the stuff that you did in teaching Sunday school. People remember, whether they're 11 or they're 48 like I am. They remember things
Yep.
that you do to resolve to relate is
Yes.
exactly what I'm thinking. When you talk about resolve in this, and you bring it up in the midst of these keynote sessions, when you do hear that feedback, what are some of the things that you hear as far as feedback goes when you talk about resolve? Because Joe, I think a lot of people have had their resolve tested
Oh, yes.
more so in 2020 than they've ever had it tested before in their adult lives.
Hmm. Resolve that isn't tested won't stand up to scrutiny. Resolve that isn't tested isn't going to last. Resolve that isn't tested is going to fall apart at the first sign of trouble. Okay, going through the testing is what really strengthens. It's no different than exercise.
Mhm.
You don't think you can do those first 10 or 12 curls or whatever. You're just going one at a time, and uh, but then you have to keep on going, knowing what the end result is that you're looking for,
Yeah.
knowing what it is that you're striving after. Okay,
Yeah.
that end goal in sight, looking at it for the long term instead of for the short term, that is what's going to keep you resolved and focused. And see, that's what I have to keep reminding myself, and knowing,
Yeah.
okay, I'm in this thing for a reason. I'm in this thing for the long haul. I'm going to focus on the long-term things, not the long-term gain rather than the short-term inconvenience, you know.
Well,
I'm
and
going to
resolve
focus.
has to be resolute.
Yes.
Resolve has to be resolute because, Joe, here's the thing too, and I love what you said there. Most of the time we have become a society that is short-term based. If
Absolutely.
we
The
don't see
soundbite generation.
exactly. Yes, I love that. And a lot of people, you know, we forget that our grandparents and our great grandparents went through not only, you know, some of them, of course, some of them have passed away now, but 100 years ago, our country went through a pandemic in
That's right.
1918 with
The
the Spanish
Spanish
flu,
flu. Yep.
and then 10 years later, 11 years later, we have the Great Depression. Then
Right.
another 10 years, we start World War II. You know, and so again, we've seen to and for us, you know, we've just recently come through the 9/11 remembrance, and next year will be 20 years of 9/11. So every 10 years or so, it seems like that we go through something that tests our resolve and tests
Hmm.
who we are and what we are. But people that that are not resolute, and I love that resolve. People that are not resolute, Joe, they tend to quickly fall apart. So take me to the third one, because I've got a feeling that third R kind of marries real well to the two that you've just talked about.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So the third one is respond. You know, what good does it do you, um, having recognized these characteristics of change, having recognized what you need to do to pivot, okay,
Mhm.
and having resolved to do so, making up your mind that you're going to focus on the long term instead of the short term,
Yeah.
that you are going to balance deference with determination, that you are going to focus on the positive gains instead of the negative inconvenience or whatever. What good does it do you if you don't respond? You know, what good is it going to do you, having seen what it is that you need to do? You stand still and don't move forward. You know, you're not going
Yeah.
to progress at all. It's knowing how to respond. Okay. I look at it as an inward embracing, an upward empowering, and an outward encouraging.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do, you know, is look within first and see, okay, what is it that I need to change about myself? You know, it's you know, if I look in the mirror and I don't like what I see, it's not the mirror's fault. Okay. You know, don't get mad at the mirror.
That's
You know.
exactly right. Well, I saw a commercial for a mirror that it's a workout mirror. So there's a little guy in the mirror, and it's a virtual mirror, and it encourages you like, come on, one more sit up, one more. And I'm thinking to myself, if I need that mirror, I need a lot more help than just the sit ups,
You got that right.
like a Peloton mirror or something like that.
Oh my
But
word.
Joe, what you just said is so good, because when I think of response, and here's where I want to go real quick before we get
Sure.
into your story, is so many people in today's culture feel like they have to respond when posting on social media or doing something like, well, you know, I have to post. You know, I was talking to somebody about this earlier, and we were talking about social media, and it was like, people feel like today they have to respond. Like, I am so mad about something, I have to post, or I'm so mad about something, or I just have to vent. I just have to get this off my chest. And it's a response of showing up and throwing up instead of responding in a way that, to your point, has upward movement and encourages others, and it
Yes.
has that three-pronged approach. We're just responding now just to respond
Right.
instead of intentional response,
And
whether
that's
it's
not a
positive or
response.
negative.
That's
Yeah,
just a reaction. There's a
that's
difference
a
between a
great point.
reaction and a
Yeah,
response. A response is well thought out. A reaction is just something where you blow off the steam, you know, and you just, they call it knee jerk. Well, it's called knee-jerk reaction for a reason. You don't see the need and you act like a jerk. That's why it's knee-jerk. How's that?
I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. You know, but the knee jerk reaction it is a reflex where that comes from. It's a reflex when the doctor takes the little mallet thing to check your reflexes,
Right.
and hits your knee. Your knee should respond a certain way. It's a natural, but we
Sure.
think today we've been conditioned, Joe, as a society to really believe that everything that we see and hear, we've got to respond to it. And that's not the case. We don't have to respond to everything that we see and hear, because there are some things that we shouldn't respond to. You and I are both Christians. There are some things that we shouldn't respond to.
Absolutely.
Because it's contrary to the Word of God and the relationship that we have with the Lord. And I told my son this, and I want to say this real quick before we pivot. When my son approached his mom and my wife, about getting Facebook, and this was probably 8 or 9 years ago, I said, you've got 3 rules. The first rule is you don't post anything that doesn't encourage, uplift, make somebody smile, or make somebody laugh. So you don't post anything that doesn't fit in those parameters. The second thing is, if you get snarky, you're done. In other words, if you want to violate those rules, you'll be done. And the third thing is, you don't say anything that you don't own or embarrasses our family. Because I've done that. I've been guilty of that knee-jerk reaction,
right,
of that posting instead of thinking about what I'm posting and wondering, okay, how is this going to affect my family? How's this going to affect my church? How's this going to affect my ministry by posting this? And I had to set those guidelines in place, but it was a reminder to myself that I am a reflection of how I respond.
Exactly.
I am a reflection of how I respond. And I love what you said there, man. I am so grateful that you brought that up, because, again, I think we got people listening to this, and I hope you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, man, because I'm thinking the same thing, Joe. I'm thinking, how am I responding?
Exactly.
How am I responding? And so I love what you said there. Take me as far back as you want to take me and the audience into your story, because everybody has a story, and I just go back as far as you want to go and tell your story of how you got from point A to where we are today. Because I know you didn't come out of the womb being a keynote speaker. So take us through your story.
Well, I came out, my mom would tell you, and my wife would probably also tell you, I didn't come out of the womb being a keynote speaker. I came out of the womb being a ham. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. From the very beginning, you know. So I'd always wanted to be a teacher. I always wanted to share. You know, I get excited. I get passionate about new knowledge. I learn something new and I want to share it. I learn something new. I discover how to do something, you know, whatever that thing may be.
Yeah.
And I want to share it. So I went to school to be a teacher. My undergraduate degree is in secondary education. And I started as a school teacher for 10 years. And during that time, I continued my higher education and got both a master's and a doctoral degree, also in secondary education.
God bless you. I couldn't do it. I stopped at an MBA.
Pain in the neck. Let me tell you what, it was tough for about almost 10 years. I was working on those degrees, and my doctoral degree has a double minor in computers and theology. And so, you know,
Joe, that is so, it's like that old the little song, which of these things is not like the other?
Yeah, right.
Computers and
And
theology.
theology. Right. Yeah, you would think that's not
Yeah.
a, that's not a, that's not a good mix. But I will say this. Yes, as you say, I am indeed a Christian. I know the Lord Jesus Christ is my Savior and Lord, and I am not ashamed about it. I'm not going to cram it down anybody's throat,
Yeah.
and I will respect others if they happen to believe differently than I believe. And that's fine. That's up to you. I will share my faith every opportunity I get,
Yep.
and I will respect people who feel differently. I will respectfully disagree,
Hmm.
and I'm going to be nice about it. I'm not going to be obnoxious about it. But at the same time, that particular that is part of who I am, and it's pretty clear on the bios whenever I get interviewed for conference speaking things, and not once has it ever caused me to get kicked off the stage or asked not to come back. I'm very grateful for that. I mean, other than the grace of God, I don't know how. If they
Yeah.
hear me speak, maybe that's why they don't want me to come back. But no, uh, you know, being a Christian is a thing that's supposed to define what I am, as it would if I were a member of any faith. Whatever faith you are, if your faith is not the kind of thing that's going to dictate the kind of person that you are, or at least inform how you are and how you react. It's the grid through which you interpret the things that come your way, and
Yeah.
how you're going to act and react, and respond rather than react, as we talked about before. And so the theology and the education, I taught at Christian schools. I taught Spanish, Bible, computers, history, and economics. A
And when
wide
you teach
variety
it,
of
yeah,
things.
and when
Yeah.
you teach at a Christian school, I know this because my son went to a Christian high school. He went to two
Hmm.
Christian high schools, went to one and then transferred to another one. And I've done public address announcing for basketball games at both the schools that he attended.
Hmm.
The teachers wear a lot of different hats at
Yes, they do.
Christian schools because um the just to be very honest, the pay is not as robust
Nope.
as the public school and the benefits, but you get the chance to more directly impact the
Yes,
lives of your students, and not just for 4 years while they're in high school. You get a chance to impact their eternity as well
absolutely.
too. And so,
Absolutely.
you get to impact something that lasts well beyond this life. When you think about the time that you taught in a Christian school, what was the one thing? Do you have a particular moment that really stands out to you about that time teaching in a Christian school that
Oh,
you'll go,
yes.
man, I'll never forget this for the rest of my life?
Several moments like that. It's things like when you go to a kid's basketball game and you cheer your living guts out, that has nothing to do with preaching the gospel, but has everything to do with showing a kid that you care about their life, and knowing that sports is something that God can use. The dedication of giving it everything you've got on the field, and doing your very best in whatever venue of life that you're in, and knowing that someone like a teacher that you look up to and you think, oh, he or she is just going to be in the classroom telling me what to do and showing me stuff or whatever. But you show up at a ball game when they know you got 500 papers to grade, and you're going to go anyway. You're tired, you're sleepy, but you're going to go anyway, and
Yeah.
you're going to show your support for them in their endeavor, and knowing that they are going to show a good Christian testimony, and not try to commit more fouls or whatever. Christian ball players can commit fouls just
Yes,
as
they
much.
can.
Right? Yeah, they can. Okay, but they know that they're going to try for much higher motivation, not just to get this, or not just to lose the game or whatnot, but to know the value of sportsmanship, the value of fairness, the value of dedication, the value of hard work on the court, and knowing that you have someone like a teacher whom you look up to be there means a great deal. And to have them come later and tell me, and even more so now, I see it now. That was 30 something years ago. And even to this day, those kids have now grown up. We still go to the same church. They now have kids of their own that are in school and stuff. And they come up to me and tell me how much they appreciated, my being consistent with them, caring enough about them to not only teach, but also to participate in some of their extracurricular activities. I've had some of them come up to me and they say, I just love the way you and Mr. Perez, you're all are always holding hands, and you're always looking at each other and you're opening the door for her or whatever. And that meant such a great deal to me. And now I look at them, they're all grown up. They've got their own wives and things that I didn't even know I was teaching them. I see them, the way they treat their wives and their kids and the way now they are continuing that same legacy. So if you ask me to point to a single moment, there's gobs of moments, there's a biblical principle that you reap what you sow. And that's not always the bad stuff. What goes around comes around. That's true. But it's also interpreted in a positive sense in that, you sow these good seeds of love and caring and integrity and values into these kids. And 30 years later, they have those same values. They're passing it on to their kids, and they're thanking you for it. And you see that the impact that you thought was a tiny thing has wound up being a much greater impact than you imagined. To me, that is worth more than every single keynote that I've ever had at a secular conference. Is to have people tell me that,
What did you learn from teaching that has helped you in keynote speaking?
To make a connection with your audience, to know your audience, to read your audience. You have to know your material and you have to know your audience. You're not going to teach math to a fifth grader in the same way that you would a senior in high school. In the same way, getting back to the example about the joke with the data scientist, you're not going. It's the same concept. It might be even the same presentation. In my case, the one about actionable data. In knowing that as a teacher, you have to know your students and adjust how you're going to say things and how you're going to present it, what illustrations you use, even the inflection in your voice, that's going to differ based on where people are in life, what occupation they're at, what the theme of the conference is, where they are at in the hierarchy of their organization where they work. All that relates to teaching and knowing that. The knowing of the material also comes back to teaching. Being able to give something that resonates with your audience, something that is specific enough that they gain additional knowledge, yet generic enough that doesn't get you down into the weeds. It has to resonate with them because, I'm just going to get one shot, 30 minutes, 45 minutes in front of them for a keynote or something. And I'm going to make an impact on them. And now, it may not be the same kind of an impact that I had when I was a teacher because it was an everyday thing. This is just a one-shot 45-minute deal. But, if I can touch one life, that person goes back to their job, whatever functional area that they're seeking to excel. And because of something that I said to them, whether it was a joke that brightened their day, whether it was an encouragement that lightened their load, or whether it was additional knowledge that brightened their concept of this particular thing, and I have ignited within them the same passion about their data or about their job that I have about mine, then I consider myself a success. That comes from teaching. Part of being a teacher is you have a passion about your subject. You want to ignite that passion within the mind, within the heart of the person who's on the other side of that room, the other side of the mic, or the other side of the screen when it's a virtual conference or some other type of digitized event.
Take me to the first time that you did a keynote that you did, because speaking, and Joe, I'll say this. I was 3 the first time my dad had me sing in church.
Oh my.
I'm 48 now. So when somebody says, "Okay, sit down and sing something," or it's like, I've done this so much, I don't get nervous anymore. But
Right.
doing something different when you go from teaching and now you're giving a keynote address, and instead of impressionable kids in the room, there are skeptical adults in the room.
Yes.
And so take me to that first time that you gave a keynote. Kind of what was that thought process like for you, and kind of what were you thinking of? Were you thinking, oh boy, or were you thinking, oh no?
I was thinking, oh goodness, what am I doing here? Wow, why did they ask me to do this? It was the very first keynote was to a group of people that were in an HR division of Fidelity Investments.
Hmm.
They were their HR function was being outsourced to another company,
Oh my.
and and they still had their jobs, but it was a huge change, and they wanted to have someone that could come in and talk about how do you handle this change? How do you go from being where you were to where you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow? As a matter of fact, that particular instance was where this topic, the cultivating a climate for paradigm shift topic, the 3 R's, that was the birth of that. That is what gave me the idea for that particular topic. And believe it or not, that was in 2002.
Hmm.
Okay, 18 years ago, and it wouldn't resurface for another 16 years when I spoke at the Raleigh CIO, or excuse me, the Premier CIO Forum at the Raleigh Convention Center in December of 2018. So that was, yes, a 16-year period of time. I didn't even, I had no idea what I was going to talk about until they approached me and saying, well, this is what we're going through. And so my thought process at the time, there was about 150 people there. And my thought process was, okay, what are these people going through? What is it that they need
Yeah.
from me? What do they want to get out of this? How can I get there? And again, I start applying those same principles I learned as a teacher, going from known to unknown, make it relevant, make it resonate, this whole, again, the adapt, adopt, adapt thing that I talked to you about earlier.
Yeah.
I went through that whole thinking process and knowing, all right, I've got to make this relevant. I've got to make sure it resonates with them. I got to put myself in their shoes. And, what am I going to do to help them deal with this huge pivoting? There was no pandemic. There was no, nothing like that. 18 years ago, we had no idea what was going to happen. But it was something that I was nervous. But I was comfortable. I've been comfortable speaking with people. I'd spoken. They weren't keynotes, but I'd been speaking. At all different kinds of events for NC State University when I taught there. Or taught. I didn't teach there. Excuse me. When I worked there for our workshops and things that we had. But
Hmm.
but this was a little different. It was a bigger group. And it was like I was the main event.
Yeah.
So no pressure. But no, I just had
No,
to
not at all. No
yeah,
pressure.
not at
Yeah.
all, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, the that was the main thing is all right, what is it that they need from me? And what do I need to do to deliver? And set about giving them something that would deliver and give them what they did need. And of course, a lot of prayer and
Yep.
supplication here, going up. And it was a very, very rewarding experience.
Joe, take me through the biggest obstacle that you've overcome, whether in speaking, teaching, wherever it is. Take us through the biggest obstacle you've overcome, and what was the greatest lesson that you learned from that?
Sure. Oh boy. Well, I think the biggest obstacle was in when my wife came down with bacterial meningitis 10
Hmm.
years ago. And I'm gonna try not to get emotional. So, besides my eternal salvation, my wife Diana is the greatest gift that God ever gave me.
Yep.
And we've been married for 36 years. She's my best friend, and I love her dearly. I love her more than life itself. But she came down with bacterial meningitis, and I thought I was going to lose her. I almost did.
Mm-hmm.
It was touch and go in the ICU, and that obstacle, the obstacle was knowing that the dearest person on this earth to me is about to be taken away from me. And I'm sorry, this is a very vulnerable moment for me right now.
Go ahead.
And not knowing what was going to happen, and wondering how do I go on as a widower? What's the first thing and yet, by the grace of God, I was spared, and God spared her life, and believe me, it was that was a huge obstacle. And the lesson is to be more appreciative for the life of someone who means that much to you. You should show it. Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that she's worth any trouble that I have to go through to be a blessing and a help to her, is increasing your gratitude and appreciation for a thing that you almost lose.
Yeah.
Focusing on, regardless of what's going to happen, God's going to take care of me, and knowing that, regardless of the outcome, I'm still in the palm of His hand. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He that abideth under the shadow of the Almighty. I mean, it's times like that where verses from the Bible came to life. Okay, promises that I will never leave you nor forsake you.
Yeah.
Those things, you treasure the things that you have learned. You treasure the things that are true principles, and yet you come face to face. It smacks you right in the face that it's going to be death at any moment. That is when you realize, okay, you know what? This is how much she is worth to me. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to show my appreciation. This is how I'm going to live out these principles that I know are true. And it's times like this that when those things are put to the test, it's like gold, tried by fire. Okay. Gold, the gold that is the purest is the one that's gone through the most intense fire. And I think that was the biggest obstacle ever. And I mean, she's totally recovered now. It's been 10 years, and I'm more grateful for my sweet Diana every day of my life.
That's wonderful. That is so cool. Last question I've got for you, and I appreciate your candor and your candidness there, and sharing a very personal moment in your life. What's the biggest piece of intentional encouragement that you can leave with folks today?
Be real. Be positive. Be true to yourself, true to what you believe. Don't let the negativity that spews from this world, that spews sometimes from TV, from politicians, regardless of what political party I'm not even going to get into that.
Yeah.
Be true to what you believe. Okay. Don't compromise your principles. Whatever you're faced with, remain true. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't focus on the negative. Look for the bright side, because, no matter how bad things get, somebody else has got it worse than you.
Yep.
And look for ways that you can be an encouragement to someone else. Look for ways that you can take the lessons, the pivoting that you may have done, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in speaking, whether it's in teaching, whether it's in, you have a loved one who gets sick, whatever. You may not go through the same thing, but you know what? Take what you've learned and recognize someone else is going through something worse.
Yeah.
And what sympathy and compassion that you can have on someone else who's going through a tough time. Go ahead and intentionally reach out to someone who is facing some trial or some bad situation in their life, and recognize, you know what, I made it through this. Hey, can I do something to help you?
Yeah.
Speak a word of kindness, and don't let yourself be sucked into negativity, and know that you're going to make it. Just hang on, and by the grace of God, and if you don't believe in God, that's fine, but
Yep.
You're going to make it, and
That's
help
right.
somebody else make it along the way.
That's right. Dr. Joe Perez, man, this has been fantastic. I appreciate it. Tell folks where they can find you real quick and connect up with you.
Absolutely. So on LinkedIn, you can find me, Dr. Joe Perez. The LinkedIn is /JW_PEREZ. My website is Dr. Joe Perez, just the way it's DRJOEPEREZ. And on Sessionize, you can find me at sessionize.com/JOE-PEREZ.
And you can also find him on Twitter at JW Perez, man.
Forgot about that. Yes, forgot Twitter.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Very, very good. Joe, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Absolutely, Brian. It was my honor. Thank you so much for having me on board, and I wish you all the best, sir.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through His Word. And until next time, remember, everyone, everywhere, at any time, and any place can be